All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to connect two things that seem, well, totally unrelated. Your favorite novel and how a government actually controls its version of the truth. And it all boils down to one simple thing: the power of the narrator. So let's start with a question that, I know, seems a little out there. The Catcher in the Rye and martial law. What could they possibly have in common? Well, the answer, it turns out, reveals a really fundamental truth about power and control. And yeah, you guessed it, it all comes back to who's telling the story. Okay, so to really get this, we have to jump into a basic concept from literature class: point of view. You might just know it as POV. It's kind of like this hidden framework that shapes how you experience every single story you've ever read, even if you never really noticed it. Yeah, point of view, or POV, that's just the fancy term for the lens we're looking through. And really, it's all about the pronouns. Is the narrator right there in the story saying, "I did this"? Or are they, some kind of outside observer telling you what he or she is doing? And this right here shows you just how big a difference that choice makes. In Jane Eyre, when she says, "I was glad of it," boom, you are right there inside her head, feeling what she feels. But then you look at Little Women, and it's third person. We're more like a fly on the wall, just watching it all happen. See? One pulls you in super close, and the other kind of keeps you at arm's length. So why are we getting so worked up about this? Why does it even matter? Well, it matters because the narrator holds all the power. They aren't just telling you what happened. They are controlling how you feel about it. It's like they're building a direct bridge into your brain, shaping your emotions and your judgments with every single word. Okay, so that's a pretty powerful position to be in, right? Having that direct line to the reader. But what happens when the person holding all that power maybe can't be trusted? And that brings us to this really cool literary device: the unreliable narrator. I love this one. This is a storyteller whose version of events is, let's just say, a little warped. Maybe it's incomplete, or maybe it's just a flat-out lie. And what they do is challenge our entire idea of what's even true in the story. You know the classic example, right? Holden Caulfield. We see the entire world through his super cynical, angsty teenage eyes. But you have to ask yourself, how much of what he's telling us is actually real, and how much is just, well, Holden? His whole perspective is just colored by who he is, and it distorts everything. And here is the absolute key: this isn't always an accident. A narrator can do this on purpose. They can intentionally deceive you. They might leave out key facts or twist the truth just a little bit, all to manipulate how you see things, and ultimately get you on their side. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's see how this idea jumps off the page and becomes this incredibly powerful tool in the real world. And this, right here, is where that whole crazy question about Catcher in the Rye and martial law starts to click into place. Think about it. When the narrator isn't some angsty teenager in a novel, but an entire government with an army behind it, well, that whole idea of intentionally deceiving someone takes on a completely different meaning, doesn't it? Suddenly, the stakes are real. We're talking life and death. And you see this dynamic most clearly when a government declares some kind of emergency and basically says, you know what, the normal rules, they just don't apply anymore. And that, my friends, is the textbook definition of martial law. When this happens, the military takes over the government. And in doing that, it also takes complete control of the official story. It becomes the ultimate authority, which means it becomes the one and only official narrator of what's real. And this just shows you what that actually looks like in practice. All those basic rights we kind of take for granted, like a fair trial or just being allowed to be out after a certain time. Poof, they can just disappear. The state's official story gets enforced, and any other story, any other version of events, it gets suppressed. So how do they justify this? Well, a lot of the time, the state will use something called the doctrine of necessity. Basically, they say, look, this is a crisis, and we have to do this to save the country. And in that moment, the government becomes the one and only voice, the sole narrator of what's necessary, what's true, and what's going to keep you safe. Now, fast forward to today. This whole battle for control over the official story often plays out in that constant debate we have over national security versus our right to privacy. And of course, it's all supercharged by the rise of surveillance technology. So, is there a right way to do this? How can a government gather information without becoming that untrustworthy narrator we were just talking about? Well, there are international guidelines that suggest a framework for, ethical surveillance. It's built on principles like you see here, things like legal protections, oversight, transparency, and putting really strict limits on data. The whole point is to make sure that the state, in its story gathering, is actually accountable to the public. But of course, in the real world, different governments, different state narrators tell very different stories about where that balance should be. The US, for instance, tends to lean pretty heavily toward intelligence gathering. The EU, on the other hand, really prioritizes data protection. And then you have a country like Nigeria, which explicitly says data can be collected without consent if it's a matter of national security. See, 3 totally different official narratives. So, from Holden Caulfield's cynical worldview all the way to the super complex world of data privacy, the same core principle is at play. And the most important question you can ever ask is always the same. Who is telling this story? And you gotta ask that because it doesn't matter if you're reading a book, watching the news, or just scrolling through your feed, there is always a narrator shaping what you see. And figuring out who that narrator is, that's not just some nerdy literary skill. It's literally the first step to thinking for yourself. And I want to leave you with this last thought this time from Thoreau. He reminds us that it doesn't matter how objective his story tries to be, there is always a first person speaking. And learning to hear that voice, whether it belongs to a character in a book, an author, or an entire government, that is the key to actually understanding the world around you.